If the U.S. imposes tariffs on steel and aluminum, Canada would respond. Today, the federal government followed through.
South Korea just shook the global economy with a counterstrike capable of destroying the entire U.S. automotive sector. The action comes after newly appointed U.S. President Donald Trump imposed broad tariffs on imported automobiles and auto components. A policy intended to support American industry has sparked a strong global reaction. South Korea, a major player in the automotive industry, responded quickly with a bold strategic move that could leave American manufacturers barely surviving. To receive more updates, click the like and subscribe buttons before we begin. For many years, South Korea has been an important player in the global automotive supply chain. Its innovative technology, low-cost manufacturing, and highly skilled workforce have made its auto behemoths, Hyundai, Kia, and a network of suppliers indispensable in the U.S. market. While U.S. manufacturers have relied on Korean components to keep their production lines running, American consumers have long valued Korean-made vehicles for their affordability, dependability, and innovation. Although Trump's tariffs were intended to force foreign companies to relocate their manufacturing to the United States, South Korea has chosen to use its economic might in a way that may throw the entire auto sector off balance. The South Korean government, backed by its strong auto manufacturers and supply chains, has announced a radical shift, an immediate halt to all exports of critical automotive parts and vehicles to the United States. This decision is a calculated economic move intended to highlight the weaknesses of the U.S. auto industry, not a tit-for-tat reaction. American factories will face an unprecedented production crisis without South Korean components, with assembly lines halted. Car manufacturers such as Ford, General Motors, and Tesla rely heavily on Korean-made semiconductors, batteries, transmissions, and other critical components. Without them, production costs will skyrocket, delays will increase, and inventory will fall. The immediate consequences for American automakers, which are already dealing with supply chain disruptions and rising material costs, will be disastrous. Ford and General Motors in particular have spent years simplifying processes by relying on just-in-time inventory systems, which provide a small buffer for unexpected shortages. If South Korean components stop arriving, manufacturing could slow down within weeks, leading to significant layoffs and plant closures. Car dealerships across the United States will soon feel the pressure as declining inventory drives up prices and drives dissatisfied customers to foreign competitors who still have inventory. South Korea's decision stems from a genuine recognition of its own economic strength. Over decades, the country has built a robust auto industry based on efficiency, quality, and global competitiveness. Unlike some other countries with declining manufacturing sectors, South Korea has consistently innovated to maintain its leadership in electric vehicle hybrid technologies. This action clearly communicates something. Cutting South Korea off from its supply chain would be unaffordable for the U.S. without serious consequences. The choice also emphasizes the larger geopolitical conflicts at hand. Trump's tariffs were framed as an economic nationalism campaign, with the goal of bringing manufacturing jobs back to American soil. Meanwhile, they have been harshly criticized as a narrow-minded and aggressive strategy that ignores the complexities of global trade. The new government underestimated the retaliatory actions that other countries could take in response to such a sudden stance against key trading partners. South Korea's counterstrike includes more than just cars. It demonstrates to other countries and businesses that the United States is not immune from economic warfare. The financial markets reacted quickly in the days after the announcement. Major U.S. automakers' shares fell sharply, and investors scrambled to assess the long-term impact. The consequences extended beyond just automakers. Businesses engaged in dealerships, auto financing, and even raw material suppliers faced increased uncertainty. Wall Street analysts warned that prolonged disruptions could lead to a broader economic downturn, particularly in areas such as Michigan and Ohio that rely heavily on the automotive sector. South Korea's action is motivated by self-preservation rather than retaliation. Years of free trade negotiations and positioning the country as a major player in global markets have aided it. Trump's tariffs have put Korean businesses in jeopardy, threatening to disrupt this stability. Instead of giving in to U.S. pressure, South Korea has decided to defend its interests by leveraging its position in a sector where U.S. replacements are scarce. the White House is currently fighting uphill. Initially defending tariffs as a necessary step towards American manufacturing revival, the Trump administration overlooked the unintended consequences. While South Korea drains resources, the United States must decide whether to escalate protectionist policies or seek a quick resolution before the situation spirals out of control. Any attempt to manufacture the missing parts locally would require significant time and financial commitment, neither of which automakers have in abundance. For an administration based on economic nationalism, lifting or easing tariffs would be viewed as a significant policy retreat. Aside from the current crisis, this standoff raises broader concerns about the direction of global trade. The automotive sector, with supply chains spanning multiple continents, has long demonstrated modern economies' interdependence. The Trump administration's promotion of economic self-sufficiency contradicts the reality that no single nation can produce every component at a cost-effective and efficient rate. South Korea's action exposes the weakness of this assumption and forces the United States to confront the real consequences of tough trade policies. Other major auto-producing nations are keeping a close eye as well. Japan, Germany, China, and South Korea all have significant interests in the U.S. automotive market. Therefore, if their sectors face danger, South Korea's aggressive response may inspire them to act similarly. If the U.S. automotive sector collapses as a result of these disruptions, the global economic balance may shift as other countries step in to replace faltering American producers. The American customer will be among the first to suffer the consequences of this conflict. As supply chains are disrupted, the cost of new vehicles will rise dramatically. Inflation and semiconductor shortages have already pushed the average U.S. car price up. Customers will now pay more, wait longer, and have fewer options as critical supplier ties are severed. Already hot due to supply issues caused by the epidemic, the used car market will experience increased demand, driving prices to unsustainable levels. For auto workers and labor unions, the picture is similarly bleak. Many U.S. auto workers had hoped that Trump's tariffs would spark a manufacturing boom, restoring jobs lost through outsourcing. In fact, the opposite is true. Production lines will idle due to a lack of required components for vehicle assembly, leaving workers without pay. Depending on auto industry employment, the economic spillover effects could extend to suppliers, trucking companies, and even local businesses. The pressure on Washington to act will increase as the crisis progresses. Before irreversible damage is done, consumers, labor unions, and automakers will all demand a solution. After intervening, the South Korean government will wait to see if the U.S. is willing to negotiate or if the standoff escalates. The next step by the Trump administration will be critical. If the United States decides to tighten trade restrictions, it risks forcing other allies to follow suit, sparking a full-fledged trade war that could include the automotive sector. If it backs down, it will be perceived as a humiliating concession that undermines the effectiveness of its protectionist policy. Either way, the road ahead appears perilous, and the global economy may never be the same. South Korea's counterstrike sent a strong message to both the world and the United States. In an age of interconnected economies, no country can afford to act unilaterally without bearing consequences. The fate of the U.S. auto industry is now in jeopardy as a result of a high-stakes economic battle with no clear end in sight. The consequences of South Korea's decision to stop exporting critical automotive components to the United States will become apparent quickly, triggering a domino effect throughout the American economy. As American manufacturers rush to find other suppliers, they will quickly realize that South Korea's industry dominance is difficult to replace. Long reliant on a complex web of global supply chains, the U.S. automotive industry will face logistical nightmares as it attempts to restructure its entire procurement network overnight. Without South Korean components, manufacturers across the United States will run out in weeks. Assembly lines in Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and other automotive centers are the first to suffer, with companies such as Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis discovering that even one missing component can cause production to halt completely. Efficiency is the guiding principle in modern vehicle design. To save money on storage and increase output, every component must arrive on time for assembly. Without critical transmissions, braking systems, electronic control units, and semiconductors from South Korea, production will come to a grinding halt, resulting in plant closures and the permanent relocation of tens of thousands of employees. The consequences of South Korea's counterattack will extend far beyond the manufacturing lines. Already dealing with supply shortages caused by previous semiconductor bottlenecks, the U.S. auto dealership network will see inventory disappear even faster. Dealerships with hundreds of vehicles on their lots will discover they have only a few to sell. Scarcity will drive up prices, making new cars unaffordable for the average American buyer. Simultaneously, pandemic-era supply chain disruptions will stretch the used car market to its limits, forcing buyers to pay exorbitant prices for older, higher-mileage vehicles. The financial damage will soon spread to related sectors. Auto parts stores such as AutoZone and O'Reilly Auto Parts, which rely on a consistent supply of imported components, will find it increasingly difficult to keep basic replacement parts in stock. Repair shops and mechanics, many of whom rely on South Korean-made electronic modules, will be unable to properly service newer vehicles. Delays in vehicle repairs could make it more difficult for millions of Americans to keep their cars on the road. As South Korea exits the U.S. market, American manufacturers will be forced to look for alternative suppliers. However, the options are limited. Two other major players in the global automotive sector, Japan and Germany, may be hesitant to intervene because they could be the next targets for tariff increases in Trump's crosshairs. China, a major producer of batteries and electronic components, could theoretically alleviate some of the shortages. However, relying on Chinese imports contradicts the government's nationalist economic policies. Furthermore, China's own geopolitical and economic disputes with the U.S. make it unlikely that American companies will want to rely more on Chinese suppliers. One idea that will emerge as manufacturers seek solutions is to increase domestic production. Along with economic nationalists, the Trump administration will most likely support reinvestment in American manufacturing, the construction of new factories, and the training of a new generation of American workers to replace foreign supply chains. However, this strategy presents significant difficulties. New factories take years to build and require significant capital investment as well as regulatory clearance. Even if plants could be built at previously unheard-of speeds, there is currently no workforce to run them. America has spent decades outsourcing auto component manufacturing, and the knowledge required to mass-produce high-tech automotive parts is not widely available. Already reeling from the initial announcement, the financial markets will experience increased volatility as investors react to the escalating crisis. Already battered by the first wave of news, American automakers' stocks will plummet even further as plant closures become inevitable. Businesses in the financing, shipping, and automotive logistics sectors will suffer greatly as the industry becomes increasingly uncertain. As vehicle prices rise above consumers' ability to pay, major financial institutions that have issued billions in auto loans will face increased risk. This will lead to declining sales and, eventually, loan defaults. The impact on U.S. electric vehicle EV production will be one of the most underappreciated but disastrous consequences of South Korea's counterstrike. South Korea, one of the world's leading providers of lithium-ion batteries, is critical to the production of electric vehicles. Major U.S. automakers, including Tesla, receive battery cells and packs from companies such as LG Energy Solution and SK Innovation. Without these components, the EV industry, which is already under pressure from rising raw material costs, will suffer a significant setback. However, with South Korean battery suppliers cutting ties, production will slow to a halt, despite the fact that Tesla, Ford, and General Motors have all committed aggressively to the widespread adoption of electric vehicles. This disruption will have a significant impact on Trump's green energy projects from the Biden administration. Although the new government's stance on climate policy remains unknown, the expansion of the EV sector has been a bipartisan effort. Losing a key battery supplier could delay America's transition to electric vehicles by years, reversing the U.S.'s competitiveness in the EV market against China and the European Union. Political pressure on the Trump administration will increase as economic uncertainty grips the country. The decision to impose tariffs, which was initially justified as a means of protecting American jobs, will be closely scrutinized as thousands of auto workers lose their jobs as a result of factory closures. Manufacturing-heavy states, such as Michigan and Ohio, will see demonstrations in which workers who previously supported protectionist policies will now demand a resolution to the crisis. Initially hoping that tariffs would bring back home employment, labor unions will shift their position as it becomes clear that the opposite is occurring. South Korea's counterstrike will have geopolitical consequences that are just as important as economic ones. Deep military and diplomatic ties have long kept the United States and South Korea as close allies. This crisis, however, may sour that relationship and force Washington to reconsider its broader strategic alliances. South Korea's actions are a clear warning to other U.S. trading partners. America's friends are not afraid to oppose protectionist policies that endanger their businesses. Knowing that the U.S. is now vulnerable, Japan, Germany, and even Canada may view this as an opportunity to strengthen their own positions in international trade negotiations. The crisis will also provide opportunities for other countries to fill the void created by South Korea's exit from the U.S. market. China, which is always looking to expand its influence, could take advantage of the anarchy to seize control of the global automotive supply chain. China could aggressively introduce its own electric vehicle technologies and components into markets where American manufacturers are struggling due to the upheaval in the U.S. industry. If American consumers discover they cannot afford the cars they want at home, they may gradually rely more on imports from China or Europe, jeopardizing the competitiveness of the U.S. automotive industry. The crisis stems from a fundamental economic truth that the Trump administration has ignored. The global automotive sector is inextricably linked, and no country can thrive without the others. Although the tariffs were intended to boost American manufacturing, the unintended consequence has been the exposure of the very flaws that the policy was designed to correct. Instead of bolstering the U.S. automotive industry, the action has highlighted how reliant American businesses have become on foreign suppliers, exposing them to the same type of counterstrike that South Korea has just carried out. Washington will face a difficult decision in the coming months: try to mend ties with South Korea and reverse the tariffs, or double down and risk further diplomatic and economic consequences. Reversing the tariffs would be politically embarrassing for the Trump administration and could be interpreted as evidence of an admitted miscalculation. However, continuing down this path may result in an even more severe crisis affecting multiple sectors that rely on global supply chains, in addition to the auto industry. Engaging in emergency negotiations between the United States and South Korea would be one possible way out of the crisis, looking for a compromise that allows auto trade to resume once some of the issues that caused the tariffs to resurface are resolved. Such talks would necessitate great diplomatic skill, as South Korea would not want to be perceived as caving in on such a bold stance. While South Korea agrees to limited investments in American manufacturing, the U.S. may offer exemptions for critical components, necessitating concessions from both sides. Whatever the outcome, the U.S. auto industry will suffer severe immediate consequences. Workers will suffer financially, automakers will struggle to recover, and consumers will be forced to foot the bill for a policy designed to protect them. Whether the U.S. recovers from this crisis and changes its trade policies, or continues down a path of economic isolation that may eventually undermine its position in the global market, the world will be watching closely to see how the U.S. responds. Though South Korea's counterstrike demonstrates that no nation can afford to act unilaterally without consequences in today's interconnected world, the United States may have imposed tariffs believing it has the upper hand. The fight for the future of the U.S. auto sector has only just begun, and the outcome will determine the state of the global economy in the coming years. The fallout from South Korea's counterstrike against the U.S. automotive sector is only beginning to emerge, and few expected the more profound consequences of this unprecedented action to be felt in markets, sectors, and even international relations. The long-term consequences of this economic conflict will begin to emerge as American manufacturers grapple with the immediate production crisis, influencing global trade and industrial strategies. Mass layoffs of American auto workers will be among the most immediate and devastating consequences. Although supply chains and automation have already altered job patterns in the sector, The abrupt and complete cessation of critical South Korean components will force U.S. auto plants to close permanently with no alternative. Tens of thousands of workers on assembly lines, in logistics, and even in corporate management will be laid off almost overnight. This will have significant political ramifications. The very working-class people who supported Trump's agenda will unleash a tsunami of unhappiness on the government, which is riding high on promises of economic nationalism and job creation. Cities and towns dependent on the automotive sector, such as Detroit, Flint, Louisville, and Toledo, will experience economic downturns comparable to the Great Recession. Small businesses that rely on auto workers, restaurants, retail stores, and local service providers will struggle to survive as their customer base shrinks. Labor unions will become more active as domestic discontent grows, planning demonstrations, strikes, and lobbying campaigns to lower tariffs. The United Auto Workers, UAW, and other powerful labor organizations will press legislators to advocate for emergency trade negotiations with South Korea in order to restore the supply of components that keep American factories running. The political divide over trade policy will grow. Some argue that protectionism has backfired, while others advocate for even harsher policies against foreign automakers. Toyota, Honda, Volkswagen, and BMW, among other global manufacturers with significant operations in the United States, will assess the damage and adjust their plans accordingly. Many of these companies operate American factories that rely to some extent on South Korean-made components. If they are unable to complete vehicle manufacturing, they may choose to focus their efforts on other countries with more stable supply chains, such as Canada, Mexico, or European countries. This will further erode America's reputation as a manufacturing hub, contributing to the perception that the United States is becoming an untrustworthy trading partner. The crisis will also cause havoc in the financial sector. Auto manufacturing is a key component of the American economy, so any disruption will have far-reaching consequences for the stock market. As investors see no quick solution to the crisis, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis' stock prices will continue to decline. Outside of the manufacturers, banks and other financial institutions that rely heavily on auto loans will suffer. Auto loans have long been a growing segment of consumer lending, with millions of Americans financing their vehicles through banks and credit unions. If the supply of new cars fails, the prices of existing vehicles will skyrocket, resulting in higher monthly payments and a greater financial burden on buyers. Defaults on auto loans could increase significantly, causing financial market volatility similar to the subprime mortgage crisis. Major banks and the Federal Reserve will be required to review their lending policies, resulting in tighter credit conditions at a time when consumers are already dealing with inflation and economic uncertainty. The larger geopolitical landscape is also undergoing significant changes. The decision of South Korea to respond so forcefully to Trump's tariffs marks a watershed moment in global trade policy. Historically, allies' economic disputes have been resolved diplomatically. Compromises and negotiated settlements help to prevent direct economic warfare. However, South Korea's approach differs. It is more than just a protest or a temporary action to get the United States to the negotiating table. It is a clear assertion of economic might, demonstrating that smaller countries can and will resist protectionist policies that endanger their industries. Other countries would pay attention. Japan, which also has a significant share of the American auto market, may change its own trade policy with the United States. Should Japan believe that Trump's tariffs are not only a threat, but also a useless tool that can be offset with the right leverage, it may take a similar approach to protecting its automotive interests. Germany, home to some of the world's most famous automobile brands, will also keep a close eye on the developing crisis and weigh the risks of a potential trade war with the United States. China, which has long been embroiled in economic conflicts with the United States, will see South Korea's actions as an opportunity to strengthen its own position in global trade. If the auto industry in the United States suffers as a result of this crisis, China may step in as a major supplier of automotive components, bolstering its position in the production of electric vehicles and batteries. This would be a significant geopolitical loss for the United States, which has already been competing with China in the race for EV supremacy. Among the most significant consequences of this crisis will be long-term changes in global supply chains. If American manufacturers fail to address their supply issues quickly, they will be forced to consider alternative approaches that could transform the entire industry. One possibility is increased investment in North American supply chains as businesses seek parts from Canada, Mexico, or even domestic vendors. However, this change would be costly and time-consuming, requiring years of planning and a billion-dollar investment. Another possibility is that American manufacturers will begin moving assembly facilities to countries where supply chain stability is more assured by expanding overseas production. The tariffs intended to bring jobs back to the United States would have an ironic effect. They may actually hasten the offshoring of manufacturing rather than revitalizing U.S. industry. The consequences will be felt throughout the technology industry. Modern automobiles rely on sophisticated computing systems, semiconductors, and software-driven features, which necessitate a steady supply of high-tech components. South Korea, one of the world's leading semiconductor producers, will exit the U.S. market, putting additional strain on an industry already plagued by shortages. Project delays by American technology companies that provide software and artificial intelligence systems for next-generation vehicles will have an impact on global automotive innovation and competitiveness. Consumers caught in the midst of this geopolitical and economic upheaval will have no choice but to accept the new reality. The American car buying experience, which has long been distinguished by simple financing, a diverse range of vehicles, and competitive pricing, will undergo fundamental changes. New car waiting times will become the norm. Some models are completely unavailable due to missing parts. The affordability crisis in the auto industry will worsen, forcing many Americans to keep their aging vehicles for longer than they intended. The consequences for ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft will be particularly severe. These companies rely on a steady supply of reasonably priced vehicles to expand their driver networks, but many potential drivers may be priced out of the market because new cars are scarce and used car prices are skyrocketing. This could lead to fewer ride-sharing services available, higher consumer fares, and even a slowdown in the gig economy sector. The United States' global image as a trade partner will also be impacted. The counterstrike by South Korea demonstrates how strongly Trump's economic policies can elicit retaliation, making other countries wary of entering into new trade agreements with the United States in the future. Before signing agreements, allies and business partners may demand stronger guarantees because they are concerned that the United States will impose unexpected taxes, disrupting existing supply lines. The automotive sector, a pillar of the American economy, will have far-reaching consequences for many other industries if it suffers long-term damage. Infrastructure and construction projects, for example, may suffer as manufacturers postpone the construction of new factories. The energy sector, particularly the oil and gas sector, will suffer as auto manufacturing declines, influencing fuel consumption patterns. One thing is abundantly clear, regardless of what happens next. South Korea changed the rules. Its audacious counterstrike has destroyed presumptions about economic power dynamics, exposed flaws in U.S. trade policy, and set a precedent that other countries may soon follow. The global economic order is changing, and the consequences will shape industries, policies, and international relations for years to come. As the crisis worsens, American officials face mounting pressure to change trade policy before irreversible damage is done. Although trust has been seriously eroded, diplomatic backchannels may provide a lifeline. South Korea's audacious defiance heralds a new era of swift and severe economic reprisals. Meanwhile, global investors shift their focus to other markets, hastening the capital flight from American automakers. Once industry behemoths, American automakers are now fighting for survival in an era where supply chain control determines power. Without prompt intervention, this standoff could permanently alter global production and leave the U.S. auto industry a shadow of its former self. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. Tell us too, leave your comments below. How do you see South Korea's response to Trump's tariffs on U.S. vehicles? We would appreciate your feedback. I appreciate your viewing. I'll see you next time.